Hello, dear students. Welcome to I-Fal. My name is Teacher Nikki, and I am here to have another video lesson with you. So I am so excited to talk about a new topic for you today that will help you understand and construct better sentences using the English language. I know that these lessons will be very helpful for you to communicate using the English language that are grammatically correct and properly constructed, considering that we will be talking about some grammar topics. So I want you to concentrate on our lesson today, pay attention to our sample sentences, and please practice them very well even after the class. So let's go ahead and start our lesson. Let's go.
So for the next modal verb that we have here, let's go ahead and talk about ought to. So what is ought to? So ought to is used to advise or make recommendations. Ought to also expresses assumption or expectation as well as strong probability, often with the idea that something is deserved. Ought not without to is used to advise against doing something. So, although Americans prefer the less formal forms, should not or had better not. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the examples that we have here. You ought to stop smoking. This is a recommendation. Jim ought to get the promotion. So it is expected because he deserves it. Okay. This stock ought to increase in value, probability. And then Mark ought to drink or ought not drink so much. Advice against something. So notice there is no to with the negative form ought not. Okay? Remember, ought to is used for recommendation. So something that is expected because it is deserving. And then probability and negative, which is advice against something. Okay? So I want you to please think of your own examples for these four usages here. So for that, let's go ahead and study this table here for us to actually know the different forms in different tenses. So ought to for recommendation and advice. For the present, we just use ought to. Example, Margaret ought to exercise more. For the negative form, we just use ought not. Margaret ought not exercise too much. It might cause injury. So for the past tense, we use ought to have and then your verb pp. So Margaret ought to have exercised more, so she would be better prepared for the marathon. Negative, ought not have. Okay, Margaret ought not have run the marathon. She wasn't in good shape. Okay, and for the future, we just use ought to. So Margaret ought to come to the fitness center with us. Okay, for negative, we just use ought not. Margaret ought not stay at home in front of the TV. She should go to the fitness center with us. Okay, so in this case, you can replace ought to for recommendation and advice with should. All right. For the next one, we also use ought to for assumption, expectation, and probability. Okay, so let's take a look at the examples here. For the present form, she ought to have the package by now. Okay, so now for the past, she ought to have received the package yesterday. And for the future, she ought to receive the package tonight. So as you can see for present and future, you just use the present and future time expressions to emphasize more of its tense. For the past, we use ought to have plus the verb in PP form. So ought not is used primarily to express negative recommendation, not assumption, not expectation, and not probability. So in this case, you should also use, or you can also use should. Now notice ought not. Remember that ought not, or that ought to, loses to in the negative. Instead of ought not to, we say ought not. Ought not is more commonly used in British English. Americans prefer should not. You ought not smoke so much. You ought not take such risk while skiing. You ought not carry so much cash while traveling. So this is more of the British usage or British English. Okay?
So I hope you find our lesson today very helpful. So as I always say, the secret in making your communication skills in English better is constant practice. So I want you to please keep on practicing all the lessons that we've had in the past and even this present lesson. So I know that you can do it really well and you'll improve yourself eventually. So just keep believing in yourself and practice more, okay? Now, please stay tuned to our more lessons here in I-Fal, and please visit our website that I will flash on the next screen. I also encourage you to please subscribe to our classes because we have a lot of amazing teachers that will help you and guide you in improving your English skills. So once again, this is Teacher Nikki. So I'll just see you again on the next classes and video lessons that we're going to have. I know that we will have more amazing lessons in the future. So stay tuned and good luck. Study harder and I'll see you next time. Bye.